In the middle of a jewelry store, my sister Blair threw the gift I was buying for my boyfriend on the ground. She screamed, "Still playing soldier? You are a disgrace to this family." But the words that killed me came from my own mother, whispering, "She always knows how to embarrass her sister." And then she slapped me. They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. My name is Captain Mindy Roach. I'm 36 years old, a cyber warfare officer in the United States Air Force, and I had just come off a 72-hour no-sleep operation, protecting a key satellite uplink from a state-sponsored attack. The bone-deep exhaustion was a familiar friend, a dull ache that was eclipsed only by the quiet pride of a mission accomplished. It was with that feeling that I dialed my mother's number from the terminal at Savannah Hilton Head International Airport. "Mindy, you've landed?" My mother, Carol, answered, her voice a familiar blend of Southern politeness and distraction. "Just got in, Mom. It's good to be home." A pause. I could hear the faint clinking of what sounded like iced tea glasses in the background. "That's nice, dear," she said. Then the inevitable question, the one that always came first. "Did you tell Blair? She's so busy preparing for the Azalea Garden Club meeting. It's very important." Important. The word hung in the air between us, a stark monument to the chasm that separated our worlds. I thought of the darkened, chilled server room, the frantic typing, the global implications of a single line of corrupted code. I thought of the weight of national security that had settled on my shoulders for 3 straight days. And on the other end of the line, my mother was telling me that a meeting about flower arrangements was important. The discipline I'd learned over a decade in the service kicked in. I kept my voice even. "I'll call her in a bit, Mom. Didn't want to interrupt." "You do that, dear. We'll see you soon." The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, the phone feeling cold in my hand. I was an officer. I was a professional. But in my own family's orbit, I was just a logistical inconvenience to my sister's social calendar. I walked out to the passenger pickup curb, the heavy, humid Georgia air wrapping around me like a wet blanket. And there it was. Not my father, but his prized possession, a 1967 Ford Mustang, gleaming under the airport lights. Its Wimbledon white paint was flawless, the chrome bumper a perfect mirror. My father, Thomas, was inside, polishing the dashboard with a chamois cloth. He didn't get out. The passenger side window lowered, just an inch. "Still flying around up there?" he asked, his eyes never leaving the pristine interior of his car. It wasn't a question born of curiosity. It was a dismissal, a way of categorizing my entire life into a single childish activity. "Still driving this thing, I see," I replied, forcing a lightness I didn't feel. He grunted, a sound of satisfaction. I walked to the back of the car and popped the trunk. As I lifted my heavy military-grade duffel bag, his voice cut through the air again. "Careful with that bag. Don't get the carpet dirty." I gently placed my luggage onto the immaculate gray carpet, feeling as if I were placing a piece of garbage into a museum exhibit. I slid into the passenger seat. The car smelled of leather polish and gasoline, the scent of my father's true love. The entire drive home, he didn't ask about my flight, my job, or my life. He talked about the difficulty of finding an authentic Holley carburetor for a 289 V8 engine. He spoke of spark plugs and distributor caps. I was a ghost in the passenger seat, a silent audience for a monologue about a machine he loved more than me. My military training had taught me to stay alert, to analyze threats. The greatest threat in that car wasn't a hostile force, it was the crushing weight of my own invisibility. Dinner was Blair's stage, as always. My older sister, the reigning queen of Savannah society, held court at the head of the table, regaling my parents with tales of charity luncheons and her husband's latest victory in court. I sat there, a uniformed phantom at their feast of domestic bliss. "I have some news, actually," I said, finding a rare pause in Blair's narrative. "I'll be heading to Germany next month for a few weeks, consulting for NATO on a new cybersecurity protocol." Blair waved a dismissive hand, a diamond bracelet flashing on her wrist. "Always going somewhere, aren't you? Honestly, I can't keep track." But it was my mother's voice that delivered the killing blow. She sighed, a theatrical sound of maternal concern that was really a blade of disappointment. "Oh dear, off again? Why can't you find a nice, stable job here, like Blair's husband? Work for a law firm, come over for Sunday dinner with the family." Stable. The word was an insult. My career, a commitment to my country that demanded everything from me, was deemed unstable. My rank, my expertise, my service, all of it was reduced to a quirky, transient phase I needed to grow out of. The food on my plate turned to ash in my mouth. I could feel my spine straighten, my shoulders square, the involuntary reaction of a soldier under fire. I held their gazes, my face a mask of disciplined neutrality. "I'm proud of my work, Mom," I said, my voice dangerously calm. I excused myself from the table soon after. In my old childhood bedroom, things were just as I had left them, a museum of a girl they no longer saw. I opened the closet, and there, hanging in a protective garment bag, was my dress blue uniform. The silver captain's bars on the shoulders gleamed faintly in the dim light. This uniform meant honor. It meant respect. It earned me salutes from generals and deference in secure government buildings across the globe. This uniform means everything out there. I touched the coarse wool of the sleeve. But in here, what is it worth? And without it, what am I worth to them? The question echoed in the silent room, a silence more deafening than any battlefield. The question of my worth hung in my old bedroom, a silence that was heavy with the ghosts of the past. My eyes scanned the room, a time capsule of a girl they never truly wanted. That's when I saw it. Tucked behind a stack of my sister Blair's old faded 17 magazines, a glint of metal caught the light. I reached behind the dusty pile and pulled it out. It was a trophy. Tarnished and cold, but I recognized it instantly. Georgia State Science Fair, first place, Project Algorithmic Encryption. I ran my thumb over the engraved plate, a thick layer of dust coming away on my skin. And just like that, I was 16 again. The memory was so vivid it hurt. The award ceremony was in Atlanta, the same night as Blair's spring piano recital. There was no discussion, no debate. The family calendar was set. They would go to the school auditorium to watch Blair stumble through a Chopin nocturne, hitting more wrong notes than right. I would take the Greyhound bus to the state capitol alone. I remember the sticky vinyl of the bus seat, the low hum of the engine, the feeling of being a small, solitary planet heading towards a distant sun. When my name was called, a jolt of pure, unadulterated pride shot through me. I walked onto the stage, shook the governor's hand, and accepted the large golden trophy. It was heavy in my arms, a solid, tangible proof of my intelligence, my hard work. It was a shield. I took the late bus back, arriving home close to midnight. I walked in, holding the trophy like an offering. The living room was filled with the scent of my mother's pot roast and the sound of laughter. They were celebrating, not me, but Blair's successful performance. My father looked up from his armchair. "Oh, you're back," he said, before turning his attention to Blair again. My mother glanced at the gleaming prize in my hands. "My, that looks sharp," she'd said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Put it away before it scratches the coffee table." It wasn't just indifference, it was erasure. My victory was an inconvenient footnote to my sister's mediocrity. My father later solidified the family verdict. "One is art, Mindy," he explained patiently, as if to a slow child. "The other is just tinkering." Tinkering, that's what they called my passion. In high school, my interest in science and my place on the track team earned me a nickname from Blair and her circle of wealthy, popular friends. They called me G.I. Jane, a sneering reference to my short hair and my preference for logic over lipstick. I pretended it didn't bother me, but every time I heard it whispered in the hallway, it felt like a small paper cut on my soul. The cruelty reached its peak on prom night. I had a date, a shy, kind boy from my chemistry class named Mark. I had a new dress, simple, white, and the most beautiful thing I had ever owned. I was standing in the living room, heart pounding with a nervous excitement I'd never felt before, waiting for the doorbell to ring. Blair walked in, holding a big bowl of spaghetti with extra marinara sauce. "Oops," she'd said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, as she stumbled and accidentally emptied the entire contents onto the front of my white dress. The cold, wet shock of the sauce was followed by the hot shame that flooded my cheeks. Blair just giggled. "Oh, my clumsy little sister." Mark arrived a few minutes later. I stood there, humiliated in a ruined dress, trying to explain what had happened. He was kind, but the night was over before it began. I spent my prom night locked in my room, listening to the sound of Blair's car pulling away, her laughter echoing down the street as she left for a party. I cried silently into my pillow, not just for the ruined dress, but for the casual, deliberate malice of a sister who couldn't stand to see me happy. That was the night something inside me shifted. I realized this house wasn't a home, it was a cage. My escape route arrived in a thick envelope from Colorado Springs several months later. The official seal of the United States Air Force Academy was on the letterhead. As I read the words, "We are pleased to offer you an appointment," I didn't shout for joy. I didn't run to show my parents. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of relief. It wasn't a calling of patriotism that I heard. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock, the scream of a prisoner finally finding her way out. When I told my mother, she let out a long, weary sigh, as if I'd just announced I was joining the circus. "Goodness, Mindy," she said, her brow furrowed with concern, "but not for my future. What will you do with your hair? They shave your head there." Now, standing in that same room 20 years later, I looked at the tarnished trophy in my hand. I thought of a long-forgotten piece of advice from my high school physics teacher, Mr. Harrison. "Don't let people who can't see your stars," he'd told me, "convince you they aren't shining." With a sudden resolve, I took the hem of my t-shirt and began to polish the dusty metal. I rubbed away years of neglect, of deliberate forgetting, until the gold underneath began to gleam. I cleared a space on my bookshelf right in the center and placed the trophy there. It stood tall, a silent testament to a victory they had tried to bury. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. There was one person who saw my stars brighter than anyone, my Gideon. And he deserved a symbol of his own, not one dug from the past, but one forged for the future. The next morning, I woke before the sun, my internal clock still set to military precision. The house was submerged in a deep, pre-dawn silence. I slid out of bed and crept down the hallway, my bare feet silent on the old heart pine floors, instinctively avoiding the one board near the top of the stairs that always groaned. The feeling was bitterly familiar. I was a 36-year-old captain, a decorated officer, yet in my own family's house, I moved like a thief. In the kitchen, I brewed a single cup of coffee, the machine's quiet gurgle sounding like a shout in the stillness. I sat at the kitchen table, cradling the warm mug, and stared out at the dark garden. This was supposed to be home, a place of comfort and belonging. Instead, it was a place that demanded I make myself smaller, quieter, less visible. I took a final sip of coffee. I couldn't stay here. I had to get out, to breathe air that wasn't thick with unspoken judgment. Grabbing my keys, I slipped out the back door and got into my rental car. Driving through the historic streets of Savannah, as the first light began to filter through the ancient live oaks, was like emerging from a deep-sea dive. The famous Spanish moss, hanging like gray lace from the gnarled branches, caught the pale morning glow. I drove aimlessly through the quiet squares, past brick-paved streets and wrought-iron gates, feeling the tight knot in my chest finally begin to loosen. I had a mission. I found myself parked in front of Chatham Jewelers on Bull Street, an old, respected establishment with a classic green awning and gold lettering on the window. The bell above the door chimed softly as I entered, announcing my arrival into a world of quiet elegance and ticking clocks. An elderly man with kind eyes and a neatly trimmed white mustache looked up from behind a glass counter. "Good morning," he said, his voice a gentle southern rumble. "I'm Mr. Anderson. How can I help you?" "Good morning, sir," I replied. "I'm looking to have something made for my boyfriend, Gideon." I explained my idea. I didn't want gold or silver. I wanted a bracelet made of titanium, strong, resilient, and understated, just like him. And I wanted it engraved not with a name, but with a set of coordinates. The exact location of Ramstein Air Base in Germany, where Gideon and I had first met during a joint NATO mission. It was our place, a secret language etched in metal. Mr. Anderson listened patiently, his head tilted. When I finished, he nodded slowly. A titanium bracelet, engraved with coordinates. He looked at me, and I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes, not just for the idea, but for me. He was a former Marine. I could tell by the quiet confidence in his posture and the small, discreet eagle, globe, and anchor pin on his lapel. "I understand completely, Captain," he said, his use of my rank feeling as natural as breathing. "The most important things don't need to shout." His words resonated with something deep inside me, a sentiment Gideon himself often expressed. "Strength isn't about the volume of your voice," Gideon would say, "but the truth in your words." As Mr. Case, Anderson began sketching a design on a small pad, his calloused but steady hands moving with practiced ease. He paused. "Roach," he murmured, looking at my name on the credit card I'd placed on the counter. I knew a Thomas Roach years ago, loved a '67 Mustang. "That's my father," I said, surprised. A faint smile touched his lips. "I thought so. He came in here once, a long, long time ago. Must have been before you were born. He was a young man then, head over heels in love. He had me make a small gold locket for your mother, Carol. Engraved her initials on it. He couldn't stop talking about her." The story hit me with an unexpected force. A vision of my father, young and in love, a man who cared about something more than carburetors and paint jobs. It was a glimpse into a past I'd never known, a time before the silence and distance had set in. A fragile, flickering hope ignited within me, that maybe, somewhere beneath the layers of disappointment, that man still existed. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Gideon. There were no questions, no demands for my time. It was just a picture, a breathtaking photograph of the sunrise over the German countryside, the sky ablaze of orange and purple as seen from his base. Below it, 4 simple words: thinking of you. That was it. That was him. A quiet, profound connection that spanned thousands of miles, a stark contrast to the loud, empty disconnections happening just a few miles away in my own family's home. A genuine smile, my first since I'd landed, spread across my face. The warmth of his message, combined with Mr. Anderson's story, settled in my heart. This was right. This was real. "It's perfect," I said to Mr. Anderson, looking at the clean, strong lines of his sketch. "I'll take it. This is exactly what I wanted." I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a quiet joy in creating a symbol of a love that saw me, a love that honored me. In that calm, sunlit jewelry store, I allowed myself to believe in a happiness I was building for myself, far away from the shadows of my past. The warm bubble of peace I'd felt moments before shattered instantly. The bell above the door of Chatham Jewelers chimed, and a chill snaked up my spine. My blood ran cold. It was Blair. She wasn't alone. Flanked by 2 of her queen bee friends, women whose families had owned half of Savannah for centuries, Blair glided into the store as if she owned it. Her eyes locked onto me, and a slow, venomous smile spread across her perfectly painted lips. The ambush was on. She sauntered over, her voice pitching high and sharp, designed to carry across the quiet showroom. "Well, look what we have here. Captain Roach, doing a little shopping? Aren't you supposed to be out saving the world or something?" The other customers, a quiet couple, looking at engagement rings, glanced over. Mr. Anderson stiffened behind the counter. Blair's 2 friends tittered. One of them, a blonde named Tiffany, added with a giggle, "Maybe she's buying a medal for herself." I kept my back to them, focusing on the bracelet sketch in front of me. I would not engage. I would not give her the satisfaction. "I'm just finishing up here, Blair." My voice was low and controlled, but Blair wasn't done. She moved closer, peering over my shoulder at the sketch. "Oh, how industrial. Is this for that little boyfriend of yours? The one no one's ever met?" Her eyes narrowed. Before I could react, she snatched the titanium sample bracelet Mr. Anderson had been showing me. She held it up between 2 manicured fingers as if it were a dead insect. Then, with a dramatic flourish, she threw it down. It clattered loudly against the glass countertop. "Or is this a reward for polishing some general's boots?" she sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. Something inside me snapped. All the years of silent endurance, of swallowing her casual cruelty, coalesced into a single point of icy fury. I turned to face her, my eyes as cold as steel. "You would never understand, Blair," I said, my voice quiet but cutting, "because everything in your life has been bought and paid for by someone else." Her face, a mask of smug superiority, crumpled into outrage. Her breath hitched. That was the moment the bell chimed again. My mother, Carol, swept in, clearly summoned by a dramatic text message. She saw Blair's furious expression and my rigid stance, and her face immediately settled into a look of weary disapproval, aimed squarely at me. Seeing our mother as her audience, Blair's rage found its voice. It was a raw, guttural sound, something ugly and primal. "You are a disgrace to this family," she shrieked, and then her hand came up. The sound of the slap was sharp and loud, echoing in the suddenly silent store. It was like a gunshot. My head snapped to the side, and a fiery, stinging pain erupted on my cheek. But the physical blow was nothing compared to the words that followed. They weren't yelled. They were whispered by my own mother to Tiffany, a conspiratorial murmur that was meant for my ears. Good heavens, my mother sighed, a breath of pure martyrdom. That Mindy always knows how to embarrass her sister. To embarrass her sister. Not, my daughter has just been assaulted. Not, Blair, what have you done? In that single devastating moment, the last thread of illusion I'd clung to, that deep down my mother loved me, was incinerated. I wasn't her daughter. I was a prop in Blair's life, and a poorly behaving one at that. Time seemed to slow down, to thicken like honey. The sting on my cheek pulsed in time with my heartbeat, but I didn't flinch, I didn't cry out, I didn't even blink. My entire being shifted into a mode honed by years of training. My spine went ramrod straight, my chin stayed level, my hands, which wanted to clench into fists, remained relaxed and open at my sides. I was no longer Mindy Roach, the younger sister. I was Captain Roach, United States Air Force, assessing a hostile situation. My stillness, my absolute lack of reaction, was a form of defiance more powerful than any scream. It unnerved them. Blair took a half step back, her rage momentarily replaced by confusion. The silence in the store was absolute, a vacuum waiting to be filled. And then it was. A voice, deep and resonant with authority, cut through the tension from the doorway. It was calm, but with an edge of command that was unmistakable. "Touch her again," the voice said. "I dare you." Every head in the room swiveled towards the door. A man stood there, tall and imposing, not because of his size, but because of the powerful aura of command that radiated from him. He was in his late 50s, wearing a perfectly pressed Air Force service dress uniform. On his shoulders, the silver eagle insignia of a full colonel gleamed. He stepped forward, his polished shoes making no sound on the carpeted floor. My sister Blair and my mother Carol stared at him, their mouths slightly agape. Their world of social hierarchies and old family money had just been invaded by a different kind of power, one they didn't understand and couldn't control. The colonel's gaze was fixed on Blair. He didn't see a society queen or a scorned sister. He saw a threat. He walked calmly to stand between us, creating a protective barrier. "Ma'am," he began, his voice low and steady, yet it cut through the tense air like a razor. "I don't know what your relationship is to this officer. Frankly, I don't care. But what I do know is that I just witnessed you physically assault a uniformed captain in the United States Air Force." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, as well as civilian law, that is a felony. He reached into his pocket and slowly pulled out his cell phone. The simple action was more menacing than any threat. "The military police at Hunter Army Airfield are 5 minutes away. I can have them here to take your statement." The color drained from Blair's face. My mother looked horrified, her carefully constructed world of appearances crumbling around her. Their power, so absolute just moments before, had evaporated. The store manager, who had been hovering nervously, saw his chance. He stepped forward. "Ma'am, perhaps it's best if you and your party leave," he said, his voice firm for the first time. Silently, stripped of their weapons of wealth and status, my mother and sister, along with their 2 stunned friends, were escorted out of the store. The little bell above the door chimed softly, signaling their departure and the end of the siege. A profound sense of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made my knees buckle. In the quiet aftermath, Mr. Anderson walked over to the glass counter. He picked up the titanium bracelet Blair had thrown down. With a soft cloth from his pocket, he gently wiped it clean, his movements full of a quiet respect. He held it out to me. "Your father," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "would have been very proud of you today, Captain." Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them back. The colonel turned to me. His stern expression softened slightly. His eyes dropped to the nameplate on my chest. "Captain Roach," he said, a note of recognition in his voice. I thought that name sounded familiar. I was stunned into silence. "Colonel Sterling," he introduced himself. "I'm with Air Force Space Command. Your after-action report on the Silent Sparrow malware attack last month was forwarded to my office. It was an outstanding piece of analysis. You saved our entire communications infrastructure from a catastrophic failure." The world tilted on its axis. This man, this full colonel, knew my work. He didn't see me as Blair's weird sister or Carol's disappointing daughter. He saw me for my mind, for my contribution, for my competence. For the first time, perhaps in my entire life, someone in a position of authority was looking at me and seeing my actual worth, not a reflection of my family's failures. Colonel Sterling's gaze then fell on the bright red mark blooming on my cheek. He didn't offer empty platitudes or awkward condolences. Instead, he looked me directly in the eye, officer to officer. "What you just did, Captain," he said, his voice firm but kind. "That wasn't weakness, that was discipline. Any brawler can swing back. It takes a soldier to stand their ground with integrity." He let that sink in before he continued, his words becoming a lesson I would never forget. "You have to remember this. Dignity isn't about never being knocked down. Dignity is how you stand up on your own 2 feet. After someone tries to take them out from under you, it's what you hold on to when they try to take everything else. You held onto yours today." His words were not a bandage. They were a balm for a wound that was decades deep. They were the validation I had stopped hoping for, the respect I had earned 1,000 times over, but had never been given by the people who should have offered it freely. A single hot tear escaped and traced a path down my throbbing cheek. I didn't wipe it away. It wasn't a tear of pain, but of profound, overwhelming gratitude. I remembered a line from the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius that I'd read during a long deployment. "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." My reaction hadn't been a choice. It had been an instinct forged in the crucible of military discipline. And this man, this stranger who was also my brother in arms, understood it perfectly. "Thank you, sir," I managed to say, my voice hoarse. "Thank you." He simply nodded, a gesture of complete understanding. He had not just intervened, he had restored my honor. I left Chatham Jewelers in a daze, the titanium bracelet tucked safely in my pocket, and Colonel Sterling's words echoing in my soul. I drove back to my parents' house, the red mark on my cheek, a throbbing reminder of the afternoon's chaos. I just wanted silence. I wanted to process, but the world had other plans. It started with a single buzz of my phone, then another, and another. Soon it was a relentless, vibrating hum. I glanced at the screen, notifications, mentions, friend requests from people I'd never met. My phone was having a seizure. I opened the first notification. It was a link to a TikTok video. My finger trembled as I pressed play. The video was shaky, clearly filmed on a phone. The title read, "Air Force Captain Attacked by Her Own Sister. Her Reaction is Unbelievable." I watched in horror and fascination as the scene replayed itself. Blair's sneering face, My cold reply, my mother's arrival, the shriek, the slap, the sharp, ugly sound of it. And then my own face, my stillness, my refusal to break. The video ended with Colonel Sterling's authoritative voice cutting in from off-screen. It was only 30 seconds long, but it was everything. And it was going viral, millions of views, hundreds of thousands of shares. My face was suddenly plastered all over the internet. Online news outlets picked it up. The Savannah Morning News, local officer becomes symbol of professional restraint. Military Times, viral video sparks conversation on respect for service members. The hashtag Your Dignity in Uniform was trending on Twitter. I felt a dizzying wave of vertigo. My most private humiliation had become a public spectacle. I was in what the researcher Brené Brown calls the arena, my face marred by dust and sweat and blood, exposed for all to see. And then the phone rang. It was my mother. My heart seized, a foolish flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, she was calling to apologize. I was wrong. "What have you done?" she screeched, her voice shrill with fury. There was no hello, no "are you okay?" Just pure, unadulterated rage. "Blair is a complete wreck. She can't even leave the house. The phone won't stop ringing. You have humiliated this entire family, Mindy." I was speechless. The sheer, breathtaking selfishness of her words stole the air from my lungs. "Why couldn't you just handle this privately?" she continued, her voice rising. "Why did you have to stand there and let some stranger get involved in our family business? You always know how to make a scene." It was then I understood. In her eyes, the crime wasn't the assault. The crime was that it had been witnessed. The problem wasn't Blair's violence, but my refusal to absorb it silently, to protect her from the consequences of her own actions. I was not the victim. I was the source of her shame. "I have to go, Mother," I said, my voice hollow. I ended the call before she could reply. I felt sick. The call from my mother was a deeper wound than the slap itself. My phone continued its frantic buzzing. I wanted to throw it against the wall. But then a comment on the TikTok video caught my eye. I scrolled through thousands of them, some angry, some supportive, some debating. But this one was different. It was from a user named Military Mom 78. It read, "I cried watching this. My own son, a Marine, came home on leave and was treated like a stranger by people who should have loved him most. He was told his service was a waste. Thank you, Captain Roach, for showing what real strength and dignity look like. You are a credit to the uniform and a hero to all of us military moms." I read it again and again. The words were a lifeline in a sea of chaos. Suddenly, I wasn't alone in the arena. There were others, strangers who understood, people who saw not a family disgrace, but a soldier's honor. My phone rang again. This time, it was an unknown number with a 202 area code. Washington, D.C. With a sense of dread, I answered, expecting a call from a public affairs officer ordering me to lay low. "May I speak with Captain Mindy Roach?" a professional female voice asked. "This is Captain Roach," I replied, bracing myself. "Captain, my name is Colonel Evelyn Reed. I'm with the Joint Public Affairs Office at the Pentagon." My stomach dropped. "We've seen the video, Captain. The entire office has. Your composure under extreme provocation was extraordinary." I didn't know what to say. "Thank you, ma'am. We're hosting a leadership seminar here next month," she continued, her voice warming. "The theme is Grace Under Fire, Leadership in Times of Crisis. We'd like to invite you to be our keynote speaker." I froze. The phone pressed hard against my ear. Keynote speaker at the Pentagon. It didn't make any sense. The universe had just turned my deepest shame into my greatest professional opportunity. I stood there, speechless, as Colonel Reed explained the details. A thought crossed my mind, and I'm sure some of you listening might be thinking the same thing. Was this luck? Or was this something else? Was this the universe finally balancing the scales? I'd love to know what you would have thought in that moment. The call ended. I lowered the phone, my hand trembling. The world outside my window was the same, but my world had been irrevocably altered. A door had been slammed shut by my family, but another, infinitely larger one, had just been thrown open by the very institution to which I had dedicated my life. The week leading up to the Pentagon seminar was a whirlwind. I flew to Washington, D.C., and checked into the hotel the Air Force had arranged for me. My days were filled with briefings, preparing my speech, and coordinating with Colonel Reed's team. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely in my element. I was respected, my input was valued, and my purpose was clear. The chaos of Savannah felt a million miles away. Until my phone rang. It was Blair. Her voice was surprisingly subdued. She told me she was in D.C. for a shopping trip and asked if we could meet for lunch. She wanted to talk. A cold knot of apprehension formed in my stomach, but I remembered Brené Brown's words, "Clear is kind, unclear is unkind." Avoiding this conversation would only prolong the agony. I agreed to meet her. She chose the restaurant, of course, a ridiculously expensive place in Georgetown, where the waiters wore white gloves and the water glasses were made of crystal. Blair was already seated when I arrived, wearing a chic $1,000 designer dress. It was her armor, an attempt to reclaim the power and confidence that had been stripped from her. She began almost immediately, her voice low and rehearsed. "I'm sorry for what happened, Mindy," she said, dabbing the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin. "I was a little stressed. I lost my temper." I just listened, my hands resting calmly in my lap. The words didn't sting. They didn't even register as an apology. They felt like a strategic move in a game I was no longer playing. And then came the inevitable turn. "But you have to admit," she continued, a familiar edge creeping back into her voice, "you provoked me. You always have that superior attitude." I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me, so profound it was almost dizzying. It wasn't anger, it wasn't hurt. It was the weariness of a soldier who has fought the same pointless battle for 30 years. She must have sensed my detachment because she tried a different tactic, leaning in conspiratorially. "You know," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "if you were just a little more feminine, maybe things wouldn't get so heated. Men don't like women who are too strong, you know." That was it, the final pathetic attempt to shrink me back down to a size she could manage. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time I didn't see a monster. I saw a deeply insecure woman, terrified of her own irrelevance, and in that moment I knew I was free. I didn't need her apology, I didn't need her to change, I just needed to tell the truth. I took a slow sip of my water, set the crystal glass down with a soft click, and met her gaze. My voice, when I spoke, was devoid of anger. It was simply the voice of objective fact. "No, Blair," I said quietly. "I didn't provoke you." I leaned forward slightly. "My existence provokes you. The fact that I succeeded in a world you don't understand, that provokes you. The fact that I don't need this family's approval to know who I am, that is what provokes you. You don't hate what I do, Blair. You hate that I dared to do it without you, without your permission." The words hung in the air between us, as sharp and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. They laid bare the truth she had spent her entire life hiding behind a wall of designer clothes and social status. Her carefully constructed composure shattered, her face crumpled, and two large theatrical tears rolled down her cheeks. They weren't tears of remorse, they were tears of self-pity. The queen had been dethroned, and she couldn't bear it. "Come on, Mindy," she choked out, pushing her chair back and standing up. "We're family." She moved towards me, her arms outstretched, aiming for the hug that had always been her closing move. The hug that smoothed everything over, that erased all wrongdoing, that pulled us back into the toxic, familiar dance of our past. The hug that always meant, let's pretend this never happened. But as she stepped into my personal space, I did something I had never done before. I didn't push her away. I didn't flinch. I simply moved back one single deliberate step and raised my hand, palm facing forward, in a universal gesture to stop. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it was as solid as a wall of granite. "Not this time." That small movement, that one word, was more powerful than the slap had ever been. It was not an act of revenge. It was an act of self-preservation. It was a declaration that the border to my life, my space, and my hard-won peace was now close to her. She no longer had the right of entry. Blair froze, her arms still half raised. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. For the first time, she had no script, no next move. She had met a boundary she could not cross. I stood up, placed a $20 bill on the table for my water, and walked away, leaving her alone in her fortress of expensive china and shattered illusions. Standing backstage in the wings of the Pentagon auditorium, I could feel my own heartbeat thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The low murmur of hundreds of voices filled the vast space. I looked down at the neatly typed notes in my hand. A professional, sanitized speech about strategic leadership and cyber threat mitigation. It was safe. It was impersonal. It was a lie. I thought of Theodore Roosevelt's famous speech, the one Brené Brown quoted so often. "It is not the critic who counts. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood." My face had been marred. The slap, the public humiliation, the venomous words, that was my arena. To stand on this stage and talk about abstract theories would be a betrayal of the very lesson I had learned. My hands closed, crinkling the papers. I wasn't going to read a speech. I was going to tell the truth. I folded the notes and slipped them into my pocket. I took one deep, steadying breath. I was the woman in the arena. And now please welcome our keynote speaker, Captain Mindy Roach. I walked onto the stage. The bright lights were blinding, but I could make out a sea of faces, a vast ocean of blue and green uniforms adorned with ribbons and rank. These were generals, colonels, commanders, the leaders of the most powerful military in the world, and they were all looking at me. I gripped the sides of the lectern, my knuckles white. I cleared my throat. "Good morning," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "A week ago, I was assaulted." A profound silence fell over the auditorium. It was so complete, so absolute, that I could hear the faint hum of the ventilation system. "It wasn't by a foreign enemy," I continued, my eyes scanning the room. "It wasn't by a hacker trying to breach our firewalls. I was assaulted in a jewelry store in my hometown. The person who assaulted me was my own sister." You could have heard a pin drop. I saw a few jaws go slack in the front row. I had their undivided attention. She screamed at me, she threw things, and then she slapped me across the face, in public. And the most painful part was not the sting on my cheek, but hearing my own mother blame me for the scene. In that moment, every instinct I have ever had screamed at me to react, to fight back, to match her rage with my own. I paused, letting the raw honesty of my confession settle. But I didn't. I stood my ground. I held my tongue. I took the blow and I did not retaliate. And later, I was told that my refusal to engage was not a sign of weakness, but a demonstration of discipline. And that is what I want to talk to you about today. True leadership, the kind that isn't always about action, but is sometimes about deliberate, intentional restraint. I told them my story, not as a victim seeking pity, but as an officer who had faced a different kind of battlefield. A battlefield of toxic family dynamics, of emotional warfare, where the enemy knew all my weaknesses because they had helped create them. Leadership on the battlefield is about making the tough call under fire, I said, my voice gaining strength and passion. But leadership in life, in the everyday arenas we all inhabit, is about something just as difficult. It's about holding on to your own dignity when everyone around you is trying to strip it away. It's about maintaining your honor when you are being treated with none. It's about choosing your response, not just reacting to provocation. I looked out at the sea of faces, and I no longer saw just uniforms and rank. I saw people. I saw men and women who had their own arenas, their own private battles. I saw a shared understanding. In the third row, I saw Colonel Sterling. He wasn't just listening, he was nodding slowly, a look of profound approval on his face. I brought my speech to a close, not with a rousing slogan, but with a direct challenge, a question. The credit belongs to those of us who are in the arena. So I ask you, when you find yourself in yours, and you will, when your face is marred, and you are tested not by a foreign power, but by a personal crisis, what will you choose? Will you react with your instincts, or will you lead with your discipline? For a moment, there was only silence, and then a single person began to clap. Then another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet, and the sound of their applause was a physical force, a wave of respect and validation that washed over me, healing places I didn't even know were still broken. It wasn't polite applause, it was a roar of empathy, a roar of recognition. Colonel Sterling was the first one on his feet. He wasn't just clapping. As I met his eyes across the room, he gave me a sharp, respectful military salute, the highest honor. Later, as I was leaving the stage, a young female pilot, a first lieutenant, approached me. Her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "Captain," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you, you just told my story." I stood there, humbled and overwhelmed, as I realized the truth. By daring to enter my own arena and tell my own story, I had inadvertently given a voice to countless others who were fighting silently in theirs. The days after my speech at the Pentagon were a blur of handshakes, congratulations, and newfound respect. I was still in Washington, D.C., working with Colonel Reed's office on follow-up initiatives, feeling a sense of purpose I had only ever found on active duty. One evening, while scrolling through the news on my laptop, a headline from my hometown paper, the Savannah Morning News, caught my eye. Savannah socialite Blair Devereaux under investigation for financial fraud. I clicked the link. My breath hitched. The article laid it all out in stark journalistic detail. Blair, the chairwoman of the annual Savannah Tour of Homes and Gardens charity fundraiser, was being investigated for embezzling funds. The money, meant for historic preservation and children's art programs, had allegedly been funneled into a private account to pay for luxury vacations, designer handbags, and lease payments on a new Mercedes. The perfect, pristine image she had curated her entire life was not just cracked, it was shattered. The queen had fallen off her horse. I read the article, and then I read it again. A younger version of me would have felt a surge of triumphant glee, a vicious satisfaction. But I felt nothing. It was like reading about a stranger in a town I used to know. Her downfall didn't bring me joy. It didn't bring me pain. It was just information. It had nothing to do with me anymore. I closed the laptop. The best revenge, I realized, wasn't watching your enemies fail. It was being so absorbed in your own success that you barely noticed. Of course, my mother noticed. My phone rang an hour later. It was her. The caller ID flashed on my screen, and I thought of the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. This was a test of that wisdom. I answered. Her voice was a torrent of panicked sobs. Mindy! Oh, thank God! Mindy, you have to come home. You have to come home right now. What's wrong, Mom? I asked, my voice calm. It's Blair. The reporters are everywhere, like vultures. They're camped outside the house. Your sister needs you, Mindy. You have to help. I listened, and I understood her plea perfectly. She wasn't asking me to come home to comfort my sister. She was summoning me to perform a duty. She wanted Captain Roach, the new media darling, the symbol of dignity, to stand on the front lawn and use her newfound credibility as a shield to protect the family name. The name they had spent my entire life telling me I was a disgrace to. This was it, the final test, the last desperate attempt to pull me back into my old role as the family fixer, the emotional janitor, the one who cleaned up the messes she didn't make. I took a deep breath, the silence stretching between D.C. and Savannah. Mom, I said, and my voice was perfectly steady, perfectly clear. I can't. What do you mean you can't? She wailed. This is your family. No, I said, and the word was quiet, but absolute. That is her mess, not mine. I am not cleaning it up for her, not anymore. I could hear her sputtering on the other end of the line, a mixture of disbelief and fury. For the first time, her most powerful weapon, guilt, had no effect. It simply glanced off the armor of my hard-won peace. I have to go now, Mom. I wish you the best. I ended the call. A profound silence filled my hotel room. I had just hung up on my mother. I had just refused to save my sister. I had just, finally, severed the last toxic cord that bound me to them. I expected to feel a pang of guilt, a flicker of regret. Instead, all I felt was a vast, quiet, and liberating sense of relief. I had finally accepted what I could not change, them. And I had finally found the courage to change what I could, me. At that exact moment, an email notification popped up on my laptop screen. The subject line was simple, official. Subject, notification of promotion. My heart skipped a beat. I opened it. It was a formal communication from the United States Air Force. I had been officially selected for promotion to the rank of major. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, fat, silent snowflakes were beginning to drift down from the gray D.C. sky, blanketing the city in a layer of clean, white peace. I thought of the chaos unfolding in Savannah, the media circus, the public shame, the ugly mess. A world was collapsing there, and a new one was opening up for me here. I smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. This wasn't a coincidence. This was cause and effect. This was the universe confirming that when you finally let go of the weight that has been holding you down, You are free to rise. A month later, I had to return to Savannah one last time to pack up my belongings from my childhood room before my transfer to a new post. It felt different this time. I wasn't entering enemy territory. I was visiting a museum of a life that was no longer mine. Before I left, Blair asked to see me. We met on a bench in Forsyth Park, near the grand, iconic fountain. She was a shadow of her former self. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. Her face was pale and drawn, the arrogant fire in her eyes extinguished, leaving behind a hollowed-out weariness. She was facing serious legal charges, her social standing in ruins. "I was always so jealous of you," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't look at me, but stared at the water, dancing in the fountain. "You had something I could never buy. You had yourself. You knew who you were." "I'm sorry, Mindy, for everything." The apology, when it finally came, was quiet and seemingly sincere. A younger me would have wept with relief. But the woman who sat there, the soon-to-be major, just listened. I felt a pang, not of anger, but of a distant, sorrowful pity. "I don't hate you, Blair," I said, and I was surprised to find that it was the absolute truth. "But I can't carry your weight anymore. I hope you find your own peace." I stood up and walked away, leaving her on the bench. I didn't look back. I wasn't abandoning her to her fate. I was releasing myself from it. She had to face her own reflection now, and I had my own path to walk. There was one last stop I had to make. I found myself once again standing in front of Chatham Jewelers. The bell above the door chimed, the same soft sound as before, but this time it held no dread. It sounded like a welcome. Mr. Anderson looked up from his work, and a warm smile spread across his face when he saw me. "Major Roach," he said, his voice full of pride as he noted the new rank I wasn't even wearing yet. "I knew you'd be back. I kept the design for that titanium bracelet for you." I smiled back, a genuine, easy smile. "Thank you, Mr. Anderson. That means a lot. But today, I'm here for something else." My eyes scanned the glass cases, past the diamond rings and heavy gold chains. "I'd like to see some earrings, please," I said. He showed me a velvet tray. I wasn't looking for anything large or flashy. My gaze settled on a pair of small, simple, rose gold studs. They were elegant, understated, and timeless. Perfect. "These," I said. "I'll take these." I walked over to the small, ornate mirror on the wall. As I fastened the earrings, I looked at my reflection. I didn't see the girl who was always trying to prove her worth. I didn't see the soldier bracing for the next attack. I saw a woman who was calm, who was whole, who knew her own value without needing anyone else to validate it. This wasn't a purchase, it was a reclamation. I was reclaiming this space, this city, and my own story, turning a place of deep humiliation into a moment of quiet self-love. The final scene of my old life was on a military transport plane, a C-17 heading west. The rumble of the engines was a familiar lullaby. I wasn't running away from Savannah anymore. I was flying towards my future. I settled into my seat, the vastness of the sky visible through the small porthole window. My fingers went to my earlobe, touching the cool, smooth surface of the new earring. I thought about my family, not with the hot anger of betrayal, but with the cool, calm distance of acceptance. They were a part of my past, but they would not be the architects of my future. They say the best revenge is living well. I used to believe that. I used to imagine my success as a bright, shining beacon for them to see, a testament to how wrong they had been. But as I sat there, ascending into the clouds, I realized they were wrong about that too. The best revenge isn't for them to see it all. It's the quiet victory you feel on an ordinary Tuesday morning when you realize you've stopped waiting for an apology that will never come. It's the profound peace that settles in your bones when their chaos can no longer touch your calm. It's when you succeed and you don't even have the urge to look back to see if they're watching. That is the moment you know you're truly free, flying high with your dignity and your peace of mind fully intact. My story taught me that the most important battles are the ones we fight for our own peace, and true freedom is the moment you stop needing an apology. I'm sure many of you listening have faced your own arenas in your own ways. I would be honored to hear about the moment you knew you were free, or the one boundary you set that changed everything. Your stories give strength to others, so please share them in the comments below. If you believe in the power of stories like this, subscribe to our channel and become part of this community.